357 Magnum versus 44 Magnum hand loads. And what I have today is a light 4 caliber bullet weight. So 110 grain for our 357 Magnum, 180 grain for our 44 Magnum. So these bullets were sent over to the channel by one of my Patreon supporters, Hillbilly Scholar. So thank you for sending those bullets over to the channel for testing. So I'm going to use a little bit different powders with both of these just because I had a limited supply of powder laying around. And I'm going to use my 4-inch barrel Smith & Wesson revolvers to do this test because these are both L-frame revolvers, so it should give me a fair comparison of the type of felt recoil and all that we got going on. I'm using large Magnum pistol primers and small Magnum pistol primers, Federal with both. So with the 357 Magnum 110 grain, I used Hodgdon H110. And what I got going on there is 22.5 grains of powder. So that's right in the middle of, the starting and the maximum charge with that particular bullet weight. And these brass were trimmed to proper length by a brass trimmer that Hillbilly Scholar also sent over. So thank you for sending that. Our 44 Magnum, these are actually only once fired brass that I found that I kept back in 2011. I found it in my storage. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. I found those. So 44 Magnum, what we got going on there is I'm using the Ramshot Enforcer powder. And what I got going on there is 25.7 grains of Ramshot Enforcer with our 44 Magnum. So there is actually no load data on the XTP 180 grain XTP, but there is on the Sierra 180 grain. And the distance from the base of that bullet, the Sierra bullet, to the cantilever is actually a little bit longer. So we are probably reducing the pressure just a little bit by using the XTP, but I think we should see some decent results nonetheless. So I'm going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to go into plain 10% clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. No denim in the way to clog a hollow point or anything like that, and see what kind of penetration we got. And then I'll move on to doing a real world simulation, 4 layers of denim on this first 3-inch piece that represents our pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, then another 1/4-inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. So we'll do a plain clear ballistic shot, then a real world simulation shot, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, I'm about 7 yards from the target. I'm back a little bit further than normal because I know with powders like this, from experience, I know that you get a lot of flash going on, which will obscure the ability for the chronograph to read up close. So first up, we have our 357 Magnum. We're loaded with 22.5 grains of H110. And these are actually seated to 1.580, which is just a little bit less than what it shows in the book. And that's simply because I wasn't even getting the case mouth into the cantilever at that length. So when I put that really hard crimp on it, it pulled them down to 1.58. So we'll see what we get with our 357 Magnum 110 grain. .1622, that's pretty fast. .1544. 1547. 1545. 1574. 1537. So that first shot was a lot higher for some reason. Case ejection with these is completely fine. Interesting there, just how the boom of those were super loud, even though the felt recoil wasn't that bad. So our 44 Magnum, this has a lot of enforcer in there. Let's see what this will do for me. 180 grain. .1212. 1219. 1198. 1126, that one was really low. 1182. So I had one that was very inconsistent. Case ejection isn't too bad. Hillbilly Scholar did also send over a chamber home, which I've only done a couple passes. I need to do some more, but not too bad overall. So our 357 was a little bit more consistent. This was, we had, well, in both of them we actually had one that was a little bit different than the average. So that's very interesting that, you know, there's that big of a difference with one round all of a sudden. I don't necessarily know what would cause that, but both these had pretty good power, and I will say for a 44 Magnum, very, very low recoil with this. So let's hit our ballistics gel block, see how these compare. All right, first up we'll do our plain clear ballistics shot. No denim in the way to potentially clog a hollow point, no rib simulation to potentially slow down its penetration. I did put the chronograph up in front of the gel block just in case, you know, we get a weird reading or we get weird results in the gel. We can at least look back and say, you know, what was the cause of that? Is it because the velocity was low or something like that? And very interesting here because these are both very, very similar in energy, which would mean that this is pretty warm for a 357 Magnum 110 grain. The 180 grain 44 Magnum is really, really light for a 44 Magnum. So we'll see if there's a big difference in bullet weights, you know, what, you know, similar energy will do at these bullet weights. So 357 Magnum plain clear ballistics. 1569 feet per second. That moved that a lot. There's a whole bunch of fragmentation up in there. That's impressive. So that's hitting that really, really fast. 44 Magnum. This shouldn't explode so much, but let's see what we get with this. .1206 feet per second. Let's go take a look. All right, wow, those did really good. Both of those did really good for what they are. You know, sometimes I knock on the XTP like it's not a great bullet, but when you push them at some good velocities, look what you get there. You get fragmentation, energy dump right away, which simply means that within this first 3 inches or within a pectoral muscle, we're expanding out before it hits ribs. You know, statistically, rounds that do that do stop threats a little bit faster. So I like to call that energy dump. And we have a lot of it with both of these. So our 357 Magnum, really good damage overall for what it is. And we went to about 13.5 inches of penetration, which is pretty good. Camera parallax will make it look like it's up a little bit further than that, but yeah, 13.5 inches. Pretty good, a lot of energy dump, so I would think that that would be a really good man stopper round. Now our 44 Magnum, we actually have a little bit more damage because it is a bigger bullet, but it's moving a lot slower, but we still got good performance. We stopped right at 18 inches of penetration, good expansion. So both of those are really good. So I would say our 357 Magnum is, you know, a good round for two-legged defense. Our 44 two-legged and possibly also four-legged defense. So not bad performance overall. Let's put it on our denim, put it in our rib simulation, and see how these compare in our real world simulation. All right, our real world simulation, 4 layers of denim followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, then another 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard at the back of that 16 inches to represent hitting back ribs. So let's see what we get with our 357 Magnum. Error read, no read on that, but I could tell from what's going on, it was going every bit as fast as that last shot. So let me set that back up and hit it with the 44 Magnum. All right, real world simulation 44 Magnum. Let's see what this will do. .1181 feet per second. That's why I normally don't like to use that chronograph right there. Sometimes that hits that and wants to knock it over. So not super fast velocity, but not too bad overall. Let's go take a look. All right, so that's some interesting performance there, because that showed a much bigger difference in what's going on between, you know, two different bullet weights like that. So our first impact down here with our 357 Magnum is just a massive hole. That is big. So that put a lot of energy dump in there, did a lot right there, and yet it still penetrated to near adequate penetration. Then our 44 Magnum, not quite as big of an energy dump. You know, that denim slowed that down a lot more than what it did the 357 Magnum for its performance. And we have some mediocre expansion, looks like, going through that first rib simulation. So with our 357 Magnum going through that rib simulation, we still got a penetration of, there's one little mark up there that I can see this track at, and it goes right to 12 inches. So we got right to the bare minimum we want to see. So that's putting a lot of energy in there, and it's not wasting that energy by passing through. So it's going to do a lot to an attacker. Now our 44 Magnum, that's some interesting performance, because it went through that back rib simulation, and its total penetration is about 20 1/3 inches of penetration. So it's a little bit of over penetration, but it's not significantly bad, especially for a 44 Magnum. So we'll take a look at this back rib simulation, and it is punching through straight, so it's not tumbling, and that makes sense with that perfectly straight line penetration there. The expansion is just kind of mediocre. You can kind of see it right there. It's kind of mediocre expansion. So that type of velocity that we had going on there with our 44, we want to push it a little bit faster than this, but you know, this is pretty much maxing out that enforcer. So maybe that's the reason why they don't list this as one of their load data types, because it's just, you know, it doesn't really perform all that well with that particular bullet style, looks like. So I would say in this test, looks like our 357 Magnum is doing a little bit better, but I mean, they are different powders, but it is interesting to kind of see what different powders will do with different calibers. So let's pull these out of the block. I'll take a close-up look at them, then I'll shoot our steel, see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through plain gel, our 357 Magnum and our 44 Magnum. So our 357 Magnum had a massive amount of expansion, and surprisingly, not a ton of fragmentation. It looked like, you know, I saw pieces of fragment, but, you know, they didn't really take away from the size of that bullet that much. And that's really, really bigger than typical for an XTP. So that's a really great performance with this. Now our 44 Magnum, we still had some good expansion, but it's a more controlled expansion at those velocities. But overall, both of them look pretty good, but you know, our 357 is just about as big as that 44, and it started out smaller. So yeah, pretty good performance overall, especially with that 357 Magnum. And when we go through our rib simulation and our denim here, our 44 got a little bit smaller here. It's still expanded, but if we look at this versus the one going through plain gel, it didn't expand quite as much. So that denim did actually make a difference at that velocity to what that's going to do. But not bad overall. We just over penetrated a little bit. Now our 357 Magnum though, going through our rib simulation and our denim, not significantly different, if at all different at all, than the one going through plain gel. So really good performance with that 357 Magnum. And you know, this is one of the coveted things that I go for when I'm doing ballistic testing, is to look for something that does essentially the same thing, gets to the same expansion after going through our real world simulation versus our plain clear ballistics gel shot. Now the penetration was different, but that's to be expected after going through, you know, rib simulation. It's going to do that. But to see the very consistency that we have here, that's something I really like to see, and both of them had adequate penetration. So it's a win-win. On this is also very good. It's just not quite as good, I would say, as our 357 Magnum. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. So I find it very interesting that both of these have roughly the same amount of energy, and these guns are pretty similar in weight. That way we can really tell a big difference in recoil. See if there's a big difference just simply going from a 110 grain to a 180 grain. See if that creates a whole ton of muzzle flip, if it makes it that much more difficult to control and all that. So let's see what we get from 14 yards. I'm just going to pop these off as fast as I think I can hit the target. So 357 Magnums. See what these will do. Those have a nice feel to them. 44 Magnum. See what this thing will do. Alright, those feel really good too. There's not a huge difference. There's just a little bit more push and muzzle rise with this. You know, the actual, felt poundage in my hand isn't significantly more with this. This is not that uncomfortable to shoot, to be honest here, compared to normal 44 Magnums, because it is basically like a 357 Magnum powered round and a 44, so not bad overall. Let me back it up and shoot from some more distance. All right, 75 yards from the target just for fun. 357 mag. Let's see what these things hit for me. These are hitting just a little bit to the right for me. So it's really hard to tell if I'm hitting or missing because they move so fast, but all those hits I had to aim off the target to the left to make those hits. So let's see what we get with our 44 Magnum. I'll do one single action, see where these go. I'm pulling those. I could definitely tell myself that I was flinching. I could tell that I was flinching on those last ones, but they seem to be hitting center, point of aim, so I'll go single action so I don't flinch so much. Going a little bit too fast there. And these are definitely some hot loads there. Very, very warm. So interesting here. Looking at this, it looks like our 357 Magnum is actually a pretty good load, but our 44 has a lot to be desired. You know, even at this distance, it seemed like the 44 just wasn't hitting the steel very hard. It seemed like even the 357 Magnum was hitting harder. So very interesting overall how these things panned out. So with 357 Magnum loads like this, you don't want to shoot a ton of loads like this. You know, there's a reason why most of the 110 grain loads are rated a lot slower at like 1295, I think. It's because when you shoot lighter bullets, what happens is that bullet will clear the forcing cone long before much of that blast happens. So you got a full powered charge hitting directly on your forcing cone, and that can sometimes cause some forcing cone erosion if you shoot a ton of rounds like that. And that's also true a little bit with 125 grain, but it's not nearly as bad as the issue with the 110 grain. So a lot of people like to shoot 158 grains for their full steady diet of their ammo because it's not going to be as hard on the revolver. But if you do shoot some of these 110 grains and you keep them for defense, I mean, you'd have to shoot quite a few of them to really damage your gun. So I think they would make an absolutely fantastic load for self-defense. I mean, the energy dump was completely, just massively incredible. So I think that probably the stopping power of these would be on par if not better than the 125 grains, because part of what makes the old school 125 grains so effective, a lot of people don't understand, is that what it hits, it destroys. So if there's a person that's like trying to come at you with some sort of weapon, firearm, whatever, even getting hit in the arm with those old school 357 Magnums, it completely disables their ability to do anything. And that's part of why it's so high in stopping power. Also psychological and all of that, and blast and all that. So there's a ton of this blast going on. So overall, I think it's a good choice. Now our 180 grain 44, like I'm saying, very low powered. And it's interesting because, you know, this is pretty high up on the charge of that Enforcer. And I know Enforcer power is pretty good, but it just didn't pan out in this load very well. Not to say it was a bad load. The recoil was very, very low. I didn't notice that much flash, so not bad overall. I think it would be nearly as effective as this 357. It's just that for a 44 Magnum, you could do a lot better than this. So thank you again to Hillbilly Scholar for sending these bullets over. I had fun doing this test. I was wanting to do some full-powered light for Magnum rounds for a while. And it looks like I'm going to have to switch on to doing maybe H110 with the 44 Magnum as well. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like. And thanks for watching.